You're too ugly for anyone to ever love. Be honest, you should be grateful I married you at all." Those were the last words my husband ever expected me to remember. 2 years later, he stood frozen in front of a magazine stand, staring at my face on the cover of Vogue, finally realizing the woman he mocked had become the one the entire country couldn't stop looking at. Stick with me. For 7 years, I believed my husband, Dalton Reeves, loved me. I knew I was not perfect, and I struggled with my confidence, but I trusted that love was stronger than appearances. I ignored his small insults because I convinced myself every marriage had difficult moments. I kept hoping things would get better. One evening, we argued about money again. Dalton complained that I never did enough and blamed me for every problem in our home. I tried to stay calm, but nothing I said made any difference. Then his face changed. The anger disappeared, replaced by cold honesty. He looked directly at me and said, "You're too ugly for anyone to ever love. You should be grateful I married you at all." His words hit me harder than any scream ever could. I stood there without speaking because I felt every bit of confidence inside me disappear. The man I trusted most had confirmed every fear I had carried since I was young. Dalton did not stop there. He admitted he had always been embarrassed to be seen with me. He said successful men deserved beautiful wives and claimed he had settled for less. Every sentence broke another piece of my heart. That night, after he went to sleep, I quietly walked through the house one last time. I packed a single suitcase with my clothes, family photos, and a few personal things. I took off my wedding ring and placed it on the kitchen table beside a short note that simply said goodbye. I did not ask for money. I did not argue. I did not beg him to change his mind. I walked out the front door with tears running down my face and no idea what tomorrow would bring. As I stood alone under the quiet night sky, I made one promise to myself. From that moment on, I would never again allow another person's cruel opinion to decide my worth. Even if rebuilding my life meant starting with absolutely nothing, I would find a way to become someone I could finally believe in. The first few weeks were the hardest days of my life. I rented the smallest apartment I could afford. The walls were old, the furniture was secondhand, and sometimes I worried about how I would pay the next month's rent. Still, when I locked the door each night, I reminded myself that this tiny place was filled with something my old home never had: peace. To survive, I worked every job I could find. During the day, I served coffee at a small cafe. In the evenings, I cleaned offices after everyone had gone home. On weekends, I stocked shelves at a grocery store. My body ached from exhaustion, but giving up was never an option. Every morning before sunrise, I forced myself out of bed. Some mornings I cried while putting on my running shoes because Dalton's cruel words still echoed inside my mind. I wanted to stay under the blankets and forget everything, but I kept moving anyway. I started by walking around the neighborhood, then slowly turned those walks into short runs. Each day I pushed myself a little farther. I also changed the way I ate. Instead of grabbing cheap fast food, I learned how to cook simple, healthy meals. It wasn't about becoming beautiful for anyone else. It was about proving to myself that I deserved to be cared for. Late at night, after finishing work, I watched free online videos. I learned about good posture, body language, confidence, and photography. I practiced standing taller, even when I felt completely broken inside. I hoped that if I changed the way I carried myself, maybe one day I would begin to believe I was worth something. I avoided mirrors whenever possible. Every time I looked at my reflection, I heard Dalton's voice telling me I was ugly. Those words refused to leave my mind. No matter how hard I worked, I still struggled to see anything good about myself. As the months passed, strangers slowly began treating me differently. People smiled at me more often. Customers complimented my kindness. A cashier even told me I had a warm, welcoming presence. Their words surprised me, but I found it difficult to believe them. Some nights loneliness felt heavier than my tired body. Depression whispered that leaving my marriage had been a mistake. More than once, I stared at my phone, wondering if I should call Dalton. But every time I remembered the sentence that destroyed my heart, I put the phone away. I was still broken, still uncertain, and still afraid. But no matter how difficult life became, I refused to go back to the man who had convinced me I was impossible to love. One evening, while working my shift at the cafe, I met a customer who quietly changed the direction of my life. His name was Graham Ellison, a retired fashion photographer. He visited the cafe almost every week, always ordering the same cup of black coffee and reading an old magazine while sitting by the window. One night, after I served him, he asked if I had ever worked in front of a camera. I almost laughed because I thought he was joking. I told him he must have mistaken me for someone else. Graham smiled and shook his head. "I'm not talking about beauty," he said kindly. "You have something much rarer. You have emotional presence. A camera can see honesty, and you have plenty of it." No one had ever spoken to me like that before. Most people only noticed appearances. Graham noticed something deeper. His words stayed with me long after I finished my shift. A few days later, he asked if I would let him teach me some basic modeling and photography skills after work. He refused to take any money. He simply said someone had once believed in him, and now it was his turn to help someone else. At first, I felt awkward standing in front of a camera. I didn't know where to place my hands or how to stand. I kept apologizing for every mistake. Graham never criticized me. Instead, he reminded me to stop pretending and simply be myself. He said the strongest photographs came from real emotions, not perfect faces. After several weeks of practice, he encouraged me to attend small modeling auditions. I used only my first name because I didn't want anyone from my past to recognize me. I walked into every audition expecting to hear no, and most of the time, I did. Some agencies rejected me after only a few minutes. Others never called back. A few said I didn't match what they were looking for. Every rejection hurt, but I refused to let it destroy me the way Dalton's words once had. Instead of giving up, I asked what I could improve. I practiced harder after every disappointment. I studied posing, facial expressions, and confidence. Every rejection became another lesson instead of another reason to quit. Slowly, I realized something important. Success was no longer about proving Dalton wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was stronger than my fears. The dream I had never dared to imagine was beginning to feel possible. For the first time in years, I wasn't running away from my past. I was walking toward a future I had chosen for myself, one small step at a time. Dalton signed the divorce papers with complete confidence. He never called to ask how I was doing or whether I needed anything. In his mind, the divorce was only temporary. He believed I would eventually realize I could not survive without him and come back asking for another chance. When friends asked what had happened between us, Dalton told them I had become too insecure to handle marriage. He acted like he had done everything possible to save our relationship. He never admitted the cruel words that had driven me away. Instead, he painted himself as the patient husband who had simply grown tired of dealing with an emotional wife. Life continued exactly as Dalton wanted. He spent money on expensive clothes, luxury restaurants, and exclusive parties. He surrounded himself with people who cared more about appearance than character. He enjoyed showing off on social media, hoping everyone would believe he was living the perfect life. But behind the polished image, small cracks slowly began to appear. At work, Dalton refused to listen to advice from his coworkers. He believed he was always the smartest person in the room. He ignored important details, argued with clients, and treated people with little respect. His confidence slowly turned into arrogance, and people started noticing. One by one, valuable clients decided to work with someone else. Promotions that Dalton expected never came. His managers became frustrated with his attitude, but instead of changing, he blamed everyone around him. He claimed jealous coworkers were trying to ruin his career. He complained that his boss failed to recognize his talent. Every failure became someone else's fault. He never stopped long enough to question his own choices. Outside of work, many of the people who attended his parties disappeared as soon as his success started fading. The friendships he thought were strong had been built only on status and money. When those things became uncertain, so did their loyalty. Even then, Dalton refused to learn. He continued believing he deserved better than everyone else. Sometimes he wondered where I was, but only because he expected me to return. He imagined I was struggling alone and regretting my decision every single day. He never considered that I might actually be building a better life without him. The greatest mistake Dalton ever made was not insulting my appearance. It was believing I would never have the strength to leave. While he remained trapped by his pride, I was quietly becoming stronger with every passing day. He thought he had lost an insecure wife. He never realized he had walked away from the strongest woman he would ever know. Nearly 2 years had passed since I walked away from my marriage with only one suitcase. Looking back, I could hardly recognize the frightened woman who had believed she would never be enough. The journey had been slow, painful, and filled with setbacks, but every small step had changed me from the inside. After countless auditions and many rejections, the first modeling campaign finally came. It was not for a famous fashion brand or a luxury magazine. It was a small company promoting everyday women with real stories. The photographer told me they had chosen me because my smile looked honest and my eyes showed strength instead of perfection. That first opportunity opened another door. Soon more photographers invited me to work with them. They never asked me to become someone else. They wanted me exactly as I was. They said people connected with authenticity, and they believed I had the ability to tell a story without speaking a single word. Even as my career slowly grew, I refused to stop the habits that had saved my life. I still woke up before sunrise to exercise. I still prepared healthy meals. I continued reading books about confidence, communication, and photography because I wanted to keep learning. Success did not make me believe I knew everything. It reminded me that growth never truly ends. During this time, I also met many women who struggled with the same fears I once carried. Some had left painful relationships. Others had spent years believing cruel words spoken by people they loved. Whenever I had free time, I encouraged them to keep going. I listened without judging and shared my own story whenever it could help someone feel less alone. As more people recognized my face, reporters began asking for interviews. Many wanted to talk only about my appearance and how much I had changed. I politely turned those interviews down. I did not want anyone to believe beauty alone had transformed my life. Instead, I chose interviews where I could speak about courage, healing, and self-respect. I wanted people to understand that real confidence is built through difficult choices, hard work, and refusing to give up when life becomes painful. One evening, after finishing another successful photo shoot, I looked at an old picture of myself from the day I left Dalton. Tears filled my eyes, but this time they were not tears of sadness. I realized I was no longer chasing success to prove him wrong. Every achievement, every smile, and every new opportunity simply reminded me of one beautiful truth. I had survived, and surviving had become the greatest victory of all. One quiet afternoon, everything in my life changed with a single phone call. I was sitting near the window of my small apartment, going through emails about small modeling jobs, when my phone rang. I almost ignored it because I did not recognize the number. But something made me answer. A calm voice on the other side introduced herself as an editor from Vogue. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake or some kind of prank. My heart started beating faster as she continued speaking. She explained that Vogue was preparing a special feature about women whose lives had been changed by resilience, not by perfect beauty. She said they were not looking for models who fit traditional standards. They were looking for real stories of strength. Then she said something I will never forget. They had chosen me. I could not speak for a few seconds. My hands were shaking as I tried to understand what she was saying. The same woman who once believed she was not enough for her own husband was now being invited by one of the most famous fashion magazines in the world. When I finally found my voice, I asked why me. The editor replied softly that they had seen my journey, my work, and the emotional honesty I brought into every photograph. She said my story represented survival, not perfection. A few days later, I traveled to the studio for the photo shoot. Everything felt unreal. The lights were bright, the room was busy, and people moved around me with confidence. At first, I felt like I did not belong there. But then the camera clicked. With every photo, something inside me began to shift. I was no longer the woman who once lowered her eyes in fear. I was no longer the person who believed cruel words defined her worth. Between poses, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For the first time, I did not see fear. I saw calm strength. I saw someone who had survived pain and rebuilt herself piece by piece. During a quiet moment, I closed my eyes and remembered Dalton's words from the past. They no longer had power over me. They felt distant, like they belonged to another life. When the shoot ended, the photographer showed me one of the images. I stared at it in silence. The woman in the photo looked confident, steady, and alive. In that moment, I realized something powerful. The frightened version of me who once believed she was unworthy no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone stronger, someone who had finally learned her own value. The morning the magazine was released, everything felt normal to me. I woke up early, made my coffee, and prepared for another regular day. I had no idea that across the country, my life was about to be seen by thousands of people at the same time. I was focused only on my small plans for the day, not knowing that everything was about to change. In newsstands across America, the latest issue of Vogue was already on display. People walked past it, some stopped, and some picked it up without thinking much. On the cover was my face, calm and confident, looking back at the world with a strength I never knew I had before. The headline shared a story of survival and transformation, but I did not see any of it yet. I was still living my quiet morning, unaware of the storm building around my name. At the same time, Dalton stopped at a cafe near his office. He ordered his usual coffee and waited near the counter. While waiting, his eyes casually moved toward a stack of magazines placed by the door. Something on the cover caught his attention. He frowned and stepped closer, thinking he recognized the face. At first, he assumed it was just someone who looked like me. There was no way it could be real. Not the woman he had left behind. Not the woman he had once insulted and dismissed. But as he picked up the magazine and stared at it more carefully, his confidence slowly disappeared. My name was printed clearly under the photograph. Corinne Mercer. For a few seconds, he could not move. He just stood there holding the magazine, as if time had stopped around him. His mind tried to process what he was seeing, but nothing made sense to him. Then memories came rushing back. The argument. His harsh words. The moment he told me I was not beautiful enough to be loved. The night I walked out and never returned. Everything he had said came back like a wave he could not escape. People around him continued their normal conversations, but Dalton was silent. For the first time in years, he had no sharp comment, no confident smile, no explanation. He simply stood there staring at the cover, realizing the truth he had never prepared for. The woman he once broke with his words was now looking at the world with strength he could not understand. And this time, he had nothing left to say. After the Vogue magazine was released, Dalton could not stay calm. The image of my face on the cover kept repeating in his mind. He tried to act normal at work and in front of others, but inside, he was falling apart. That same evening, he started searching for me. He first checked the old phone number he used to call during our marriage. It was no longer active. He tried again and again, hoping it would somehow work, but every attempt ended in silence. Then, he began sending messages through mutual friends. He asked them if they had any contact with me. He even tried reaching out to people from my past life, hoping someone would give him a way back in. But people did not respond the way he expected. Some ignored him completely. Others told him politely that Corinne had moved on and did not want to be disturbed. A few were more direct, reminding him of how he had treated me when I was still with him. Dalton insisted he had always believed in me. He said he was proud of my success and only wanted to congratulate me. But the people who knew the truth did not believe his words. They remembered the insults, the cruelty, and the night I left with nothing but a suitcase. Meanwhile, I was living a very different life. When I heard about his attempts to contact me, I did not feel anger. I did not feel fear either. I simply felt distance, like his voice belonged to a past I had already outgrown. One day, a message from him finally reached me through an old acquaintance. It was long and filled with excuses. He tried to explain his actions and said he had made mistakes. He even said he never meant the words he spoke that night. I read it once and then put my phone down. For a moment, I thought about everything that had happened between us. The pain, the silence, the nights I cried alone, and the long journey I had taken to rebuild myself. Then I made a simple choice. I did not reply. Instead, I continued my day as usual. I went to work, met new people, and focused on the life I had built with my own strength. Slowly, I realized something important. The greatest revenge was not proving him wrong. It was not exposing him or making him regret his actions in front of others. It was choosing peace. Dalton kept trying, but every attempt brought him the same result: silence. And in that silence, he was forced to face the truth he had avoided for years. He had lost me not because I was weak, but because of the way he chose to treat me. During one of the interviews after the Vogue feature, I was asked a question that stayed with me for a long time. The interviewer leaned forward and asked how I had become so confident after everything I went through. She wanted to know if my change came from becoming more beautiful or successful. For a moment, I paused before answering, because the truth was simple but not easy to explain. I said that confidence did not come from becoming prettier. It did not come from makeup, photo shoots, or people praising my appearance. It came from something deeper, something I had to learn slowly over time. It came from refusing to believe someone else's definition of my value. I explained that for years I had let another person decide how I should see myself. Every insult, every cruel word, every moment of rejection had slowly shaped the way I looked at my own reflection. I believed those words because they came from someone I trusted, but walking away changed everything. I told the interviewer that healing did not happen in one day. It happened in small moments. When I chose to get out of bed even when I felt broken. When I decided to eat better, move my body, and learn new skills. When I kept going after rejection instead of giving up. Each small decision slowly rebuilt something inside me. Without mentioning Dalton's name, I spoke about how dangerous it is to let someone else define your worth. I said that cruel words can stay in a person's mind long after the moment has passed. They can feel like truth if you're not careful. But they're not truth. They are only opinions, and opinions can be wrong. I shared that I hoped anyone watching or reading would understand this. If someone is being made to feel small, unwanted, or unworthy, they should remember that those feelings are not permanent. No one has the right to decide how much you are worth. As I spoke, I noticed the room had become very quiet. The interviewer was no longer just listening to my story. She was feeling it. Later, when the interview was published, I received messages from strangers all over the world. Many of them were people who had gone through similar experiences. Some were still trapped in painful relationships. Others had already left but were struggling to heal. They told me my words gave them strength. I did not see myself as a hero. I was simply someone who had survived and learned to rebuild. But in that moment, I understood something important. My story was no longer just mine. It had become proof that healing is possible, even after being told you are not enough. Months later, my life had taken a direction I never could have imagined when I first walked away from Dalton. I was no longer just rebuilding myself. I was now helping other women rebuild their lives too. I started a nonprofit program that focused on career mentoring and confidence workshops. The goal was simple. I wanted to help women who had been through painful relationships, women who had been told they were not enough, and women who had lost their sense of self the same way I once did. Every session was different. Some women came in silent, avoiding eye contact. Others spoke too much, trying to hide their pain. But slowly, week by week, I watched them change. I saw them begin to believe in themselves again. That was the most rewarding part of my journey. One afternoon, we were hosting a larger event. The room was full of women, speakers, and volunteers. I was walking through the hall, checking everything was ready, when I noticed someone standing across the street outside the building. It was Dalton. He was not smiling. He was not speaking. He just stood there quietly, watching everything from a distance. For a moment, our eyes almost met, but he looked away first. I did not move toward him. I did not call his name. I simply stood still for a second and observed him as he watched the event I had built from my pain. Then, without saying anything, He turned around and slowly walked away. There was no confrontation, no apology, no final conversation, just silence. In that moment, I understood something I had not fully understood before. Dalton was never unable to see beauty. He was unable to recognize value. He failed to see the strength, loyalty, and heart of the woman who once stood beside him and loved him deeply. And that mistake could never be undone. As I watched him disappear into the distance, I felt no anger, no sadness, only peace. I turned back toward the building where the women were waiting. Inside, there were people laughing, learning, and healing. There were women taking their first steps toward a better life, just like I once did. I walked back into the room and smiled. Not because of him, but because of everything I had become. The woman I used to be would have broken completely under his words. But the woman I had become stood strong, not because she forgot the pain, but because she grew beyond it. And as I continued my work, I carried one truth with me every single day. No one could ever take my worth away again.